So do you want to tell us about your education, your background, what you're doing and why you do it?
Sure. Me too.
And thank you for being on here today. I appreciate it. And I know everybody that's listening does too. We're all eager to learn.
Of course, I am honored to be here. Thank you for sharing your audience with me.
Welcome. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Well, I started out in the health and wellness industry, not expectedly, because my career started when I was 17 years old. I wanted to go into screenwriting. And so my business has always been in storytelling. But at the same time, I was battling a 10-year battle with bulimia. And it was when I found Pilates that I realized I needed a bridge job for my desires to go pursue entertainment. And Pilates was the first exercise any form of physical movement that actually made me feel confident and good in my body. And what that did was I immediately, after doing it for 3 months and seeing results, and for the first time in my life feeling good in my body, I said, I have to teach this. I got certified as a Pilates instructor. That ended up being my first business. Within 1 year, I was the most fully booked, highest paid instructor at the studio I was freelancing at. And I was like, I think I'm onto something. Fast forward, I'm 24, lifelong dream happens. My first feature film that I co-wrote gets picked up by Lionsgate. And I'm sitting there at the premiere going, why am I only 80% fulfilled? And so I was looking for a pivot at that moment. And because of my Pilates background and my marketing background from just building a Pilates business, I got offered the opportunity to come on board as a consultant for an e-com company that was selling a back stretching device. I saw the product, said, I can sell this so easily. Like, let me be a partner, not just a consultant. Jumped on as president of that company for 2 years, had a successful exit 2 years later, signed the buyout agreement 3 weeks before I got married, walked down the aisle and was like, what do I do now that I'm free? And I didn't want to go back to teaching Pilates, which I'd done for 13 years. And I was kind of over Hollywood, and I realized I loved this holistic model of coaching that combined the success of entrepreneurship and business with having fulfilling relationships and not at the sacrifice of your health. Because quite frankly, when I was president of that e-com company, my health was deteriorating from stress. My hair was literally falling out because I was so stressed all the time. I was waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning with night sweats from like customer emails and like just a anxiety to like respond to people very fast. And so I realized I wanted to help support entrepreneurs in achieving a level of high performance, which is having sustained growth and sustainably building their empire, not just scaling fast to the big quick money wins and being burnt out. Because I don't feel, and not at the sacrifice of your primary relationships. That was very prominent for me, especially because I knew I wanted to be a mom. And then fast forward years later, like my coaching company has been taking off. We're over in Australia and it's 2020 and the pandemic happens and my husband's industry completely shuts down, and we are those Americans that get stuck abroad. And I'm there doing my thing with my coaching business, which has been completely virtual since 2018. And I had clients all around the world. And I still needed a way to support my small growing family, because I had one toddler at the time and my husband, with lead generation. And that was what got me into guest podcasting, which then led to the book, Make Every Podcast Want You, on how we generated over $250,000 just from guest podcasting alone for lead generation for our business. And we help a lot of health coaches, life coaches, doctors get booked on the right podcasts that allow them to not only expand their visibility and build their brand awareness, but also build their business. So we have a multifaceted approach there.
So do you work with coaches then to place them on podcasts?
So we used to do podcast placement in a full done for you model. And actually, when I was pregnant with my third child last year, toward the end of last year, I realized that that's not a model that I think is going to be fitting for the future, or for at least for my lifestyle, because as a mom of now three, I really thrive and shine. My zone of genius is in coaching and consulting. So what we now do is we help our clients build the systems to get them sustainably, repeatedly on the right podcasts that build their audience and that build their lead generation funnels. But we aren't doing the actual booking. We teach their team how to do it so that you have sovereignty over your own processes.
Okay, that makes sense. So you used to book them and then you pivoted to something that didn't demand you 24/7.
Yes, because I was
Down the
experiencing
doors,
this.
yeah.
Yeah, I was experiencing the same sort of burnout.
Mhm.
And then with my third pregnancy, maybe it was because she was a girl, or maybe it was just because it was, different pregnancy. But I developed borderline anemia, so I was so exhausted. I said I have to change the model, and I think that that's something to know in your business model. Like, where is your zone of genius, which is that space where you shine. And when we polled all our clients that were done for you agency services, what they wanted more of was my coaching, was more guidance in how they're communicating and how they're showing up, and in their presence and their energy, and how their performance was on shows. And I said, well, let's just do that. If that's in our zone of genius, rather than what was in our zone of excellence, which was getting people booked on podcasts. Like, we were very good at it, but at the same time, I think internal teams can do it better, especially as you start to get to know the processes yourself. And when you get to know your own message and how you best share your story and your message, then that creates that alignment with you being in that zone of genius. And as a high performance business coach for the past 9 years, I have seen a direct correlation between the amount of time a practitioner, a coach, a leader spends in their zone of genius and the amount of income their business is making. And so I just had to follow my own advice.
So it took you a lot of time to get people booked. I mean, it was a full-time job to get people booked, but you got multiple people booked on podcasts. How much of an effort is it if they follow your protocol to do it? I mean, is it going to take a full-time person to get them booked on a lot of podcasts, or can they automate it so it's pretty much
You can automate
hands-free?
a lot of it to where it's only taking a couple hours. Like, that's the fear of any practitioner, of any business owner, ultimately, because you're all maxed out. Like, we all have very full schedules with what we already have on our plate. And what we don't need is something else that is another job for us. So what we do is we work with business owners, authors, founders who typically have like one VA. And if you have a virtual assistant who can be trained in our processes, it makes it really simple, so that all you have to do is show up to the interview and build that relationship. And that's the thing. And show up and shine, and shine in your zone of genius, share your tips and tricks, share your story, most importantly, because people will emotionally connect with who you are, not just what you do. And then build that relationship and see where it goes. I always say a podcast interview is like a first date with a potential referral partner. And when I see clients come to me who have a strong referral based business as their primary form of lead generation, that says to me that the podcast interviews could be a place where they can shine, if they don't treat it like a visibility one night stand, is what I say. Where it's like,
But we all understand that.
Yes. Thanks for the visibility. Bye. And then you never see the person again. Versus when you look at, you and I, Cathy, are having an 45-minute, hour-long conversation. That's a coffee date. And then you get to see, well, where is this going? Like, how else can I contribute to your success? How can we build and grow together? Because every person, no matter at what level of success they're at, is desiring for more expansion, more growth, more visibility, more impact. And if we can all contribute to that success, generosity holds no bounds for your business.
Hey, we were talking earlier, this is about our 350th podcast, and I think to date, I maybe had two other people at the end of a podcast say, how can we work together in the future? And that's a big part of what you do when you get on a podcast, right? Is
Yeah.
develop relationships and maybe even collaborative, reciprocal arrangements, right?
Yeah, I mean, especially with like we have a process, and I had a client that I had a conversation with who was like, I'm not seeing any results from this process. I said, I've looked at your Trello board. Are you following the process? And he was like, no. So I
What's
said,
that?
well, I said, there you have it. I said, we have, first and foremost, it's like, think of it from influence is all about a dance. And a podcast interview is an influential relationship. You and what most guests don't get is the primary relationship is actually between the podcaster and their audience. It's not about the guest. The audience is who the guest is trying to get in front of to borrow other people's audiences. But you have to respect the relationship that has been established between the host and the guest,
Right.
because that has taken, I mean, Cathy, you have over 300 episodes. You have a track record of with longevity and a relationship of trust, and that deserves to be respected. And so when going into any podcast interview, definitely have respect for the medium, have respect for and reverence for having a conversation with someone who is automatically providing you with social proof. So instead of doing a webinar where you kind of have to prove your credentials and show how smart you are, how valuable you are, how much you've learned, and all your tips and tricks, you don't have to work that hard when you're going on a podcast interview. The podcaster does a great job of setting you up for success just by proximity.
That makes sense. Yeah, so they would get started with you. They would probably set up some kind of a sequence of emails that go out. How did you get on our podcast? I'm not sure by looking at this how you found us, but how do
I
you?
believe that was my team's work. That was my team's magic. But there's several sites to get on to podcasts, like podcastguest.com, Podmatch, even just general Facebook groups and connection. And most of those are very low cost dollar-wise or free. And it's just about building those relationships. And so when I show up to a podcast, typically my team, I follow exactly the process that our founders go through as well, where I show up to the podcast. Typically, I do my best to listen to the podcast beforehand to have an idea. And as a mom of 3 kids, like most people, like, how do you listen to so many podcasts? I'm like, I listen when I'm doing my makeup and getting ready for the day.
You're sitting in the car waiting for kids to finish something.
Exactly.
Sitting
I'm
at
like,
the museum while they have art class.
and you can just pop those earbuds in as you're just like, and just kind of get a general idea for the pacing and the style of conversation and how it goes. And then you go on the podcast and you're prepared, and professionals prepare. And I think one of the things that when we treat podcast interviews like a visibility one night stand, it more often than not, I've had so many podcasters ask clients and just talk to podcasters, and they're like, oh my gosh, just hearing that you've listened to an episode of my show. And I think this goes back to having reverence for other people's work, because a podcaster is typically spending anywhere between 2 hours to 10 hours sometimes, not just researching you as a guest, but then editing your episode and listening to that episode. Most podcasters do a lot of the editing themselves. As you grow to getting on bigger podcasts, like you may not find that as much, but odds are the podcaster has done a fair amount of research and preparation in order for you to be on that show. And there needs to be a level of reverence for that communication. And when you can show up and say, oh, I listened to this episode, I thought this was really valuable. Or I heard that you asked this question, and or just simply asking the question, like what I said I was going to ask you, Cathy, before we hopped on, is like, who is your audience? I want to make sure I'm delivering information that's going to be of value to them and not obscure. Especially like when I go on podcasts that are for entrepreneurship, there's a very big difference in what I'm going to share if the podcast audience is for established entrepreneurs who have over 50 employees versus the solopreneur who's just, in the process of learning how to delegate. Very big different business advice that I'd be sharing and marketing strategies, because you have to tailor it to the audience. So understanding first and foremost who is the audience that you're speaking to, that's the power, that's where influence begins.
Well, and for a lot of you talk about zone of genius. For a lot of our listeners, the easiest way to get your message out would be through a podcast, because people like to listen, and you can share your expertise, and you can also give value that could maybe even elicit immediate response, which, I mean, who has to sell after that?
Yeah, the selling is done for you. And most
Yeah.
people make the mistake and think, well, that means I have to have my own podcast. And honestly, you don't. Like,
You can get
I
on other people's, huh?
you get on multiple and get in front of many, 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 many more eyes and earbuds than you would on your own. The average podcast download, for like 90% of podcasts don't make it past 10 episodes. And it's because it's hard. Like, it's a project. I give the example in the first chapter of my book. I say, if you want to start a podcast, that's totally fine. It does give you leverage to get on other people's podcasts because it shows a respect for the medium. And just look at where your business is at. Like, do you really need to take on another project? Like, are you really do you have the capacity with your business right now? And I say it's just kind of like a relationship. Like, when you have a healthy, thriving, amazing relationship with a partner, having a baby is a great idea. When you have a relationship that's on the rocks and you're not sure where the next paycheck is coming in, and then you're like, what's going to solve this problem? Having a baby.
Yeah, baby.
Never works. Never works.
Nope.
So know where your business is at and what your capacity level is at, because guesting can be a very low cost commitment for your time with a lot of upside potential without you putting in a ton of extra work on having your own project.
Oh, you know what? Before we got on to, you also asked why I started this podcast. And the part that I left out was that I had a friend or a person that we work with a lot, Lisa Fraley, who's a legal attorney that specializes in practitioners and coaches. And she said, I've got this podcast going and I don't have to do anything except for the interview, because she hired this company that would do it. And I have a great team who can pick up, soliciting podcast guests and putting them in place, or even just going through the applications to be on the podcast and saying who would work and who. And so all I have to do is get on and talk.
Yeah.
And that's doable, if you've got a team and if you have somebody like Podcast Buddy that does all of our work. But otherwise, I can see that being a guest would be an easy way to reach other people too.
Yeah,
A
especially
lot of other people.
if you're just starting your coaching business. Like, as a business coach, I'm very much looking for like build with profit, not with like the belief system of I need to spend money to make money. No, you need to make money to make money. Like,
Right.
that's my coaching principle, as someone who has done the spend money to make money. And it's, I've seen it countless times result in cash flow crunches. And once you learn how to sell and you feel established and comfortable in the sales process, then it's not revenue and growing revenue that becomes challenging. What becomes challenging is sustaining profitability and cash flow.
Right. And there's a big difference between spending money to make money and investing money to make money. I mean, they're not the two same
The two are not the same. And sometimes people think that they're spending money as an investment, but it's about there's just such a learning curve that comes with growing a business about discernment with your dollars.
Mhm. Okay, so let's go back to the zone of genius. What is
Yes.
that?
So the zone of genius is that space where you just shine. Like it is almost effortless. It's almost second nature. A lot of the times it's where you were shamed or guilted about as a child. So for example, my zone of genius is in challenging, and it's what makes me a great coach. It has what gives my clients great results because I am paid to push and challenge their belief systems, challenge how they're doing something in a loving way to where they grow through that challenge. However, when I was a kid, I was shamed for that because I didn't realize you might not want to challenge your alcoholic father on his behavior when he's drunk.
Right.
However, learning that lesson and be like, so that was something that I was shamed for. Also, having high ambitions. And so now I believe your ambitions, your desires, your achievements, those are testimonies for possibility, as I said in my TED talk. Like you get to be that living, breathing embodiment of a testimony of what's possible for other people. And especially as a mother, which is the being just in such a position of role modeling, I want to show my kids, especially now that I have a daughter, like what is possible, and being able to be pregnant with her standing in New York Times Square as my book is on the big giant billboard. I'm like, this is it. It was such an amazing experience. But I used to, we've all had those friends or those relationships that are like, oh, that dream is so big. Oh, how are you ever going to do that? And I think when you have a desire for service and impact, your dreams are constantly going to grow bigger. And so challenging myself is also something that I love to do. I'm a 7-time marathon runner. However, those are the things that I was shamed for as a child. So the zone of genius, it's that space where you are so good that you don't even realize that you're good, that you're like, doesn't everybody think this way? Doesn't everybody process information this way? No, they don't. And that's what makes you shine. What you have below that, though, is the tricky area that gets most people stuck, especially most business owners, which is your zone of excellence. And that zone of excellence is hard because you're getting a lot of validation in that area. You are getting a lot of praise. People are like, oh, that's amazing that you do that. Like, for example, that was our podcast guesting done for you process. Like that was our zone of excellence, was not zone of genius. And there is power when you can recognize and discern where in your practice are you leaning into that zone of excellence versus your zone of genius. And then below that, once more, we have the zone of competence. And the zone of competence is another tricky one that a lot of new business owners get stuck in, because there's all those things that you can do. So you can build your own website, you can do your own marketing, you can schedule your own social media posts. You can create your own social media content. You can do all the pitching processes of like submitting yourself to all the podcasts and all the things. You can do all that. But should you? Is that actually leveraging your time as the CEO of your company? Probably not. So that zone of competence is where we get stuck in that space of productive procrastination, where there are all those things that you can do, and they make you feel busy, but they're not actually moving the needle. Being in your zone of genius consistently, that moves the needle on your business. Operating even in your zone of excellence, that will still move the needle. Zone of competence moves the needle barely at all.
Yeah, you know what, that we talk about the percentage of time that you can actually allot to your business as a coach, and the things that you do that are in your zone of competence eat away at that percentage. So
Yep.
if you're doing things that you can do, it probably takes you twice as long as somebody that has it in their zone of genius. And then you're maybe you can maybe make money 20% of the time instead of 60% of the time. You know, if you're spending all your time advertising, trying to figure out the technology, you know, just everything and anything that you can automate too. So that's really important. And if you look at the numbers and how that actually reflects on what you can bring back as cash flow, and why would you do it?
It's reverse engineering it, Cathy. Like it's being able to really look at your business and take a cold hard look at not being the worker bee. So it's going against a lot of conditioning and programming that has praised us for the doing. But the higher you want to go on and the more money you want to make, the more you actually need to be spending in less doing and more thinking, strategy, and holding that vision, being in that visionary seat, or in the being able to practice and do the work in your zone of genius versus being in all of the other seats. Because the hard part about starting a business is you go from having your zone of genius to the thing that you're doing really well, that you love doing, and then you have 25 other hats that you have to wear when you start your own business.
You talk about decisiveness. Why do you think that people struggle with that as entrepreneurs?
Oh, because honestly, we have so many micro decisions that we get to make that it fulfills our need for decisions. And it gives us this perception of choice, but it's not actually moving the needle. So say, for example, decisiveness, we have so many options on just like what to watch on Netflix. So it gives us this illusion of choice. And we're hitting like, oh, I made a choice today. And we get a little bit of a nice like endorphin hit from making those choices. And oh, I made a choice. And I move forward and I move the needle. However, more often than not, we're not moving the needle on the things that we really need to decide on. And so when we look at those actions, those things that really scare us in our business, whether it's getting more visible or it's generating more clients or it's raising your prices, whatever it is, look at that one thing that you're avoiding actually taking action on, because the decision is backed by action. You can law of attraction journal it all you want, but the attraction has to have action in it. And a decision actually moves people into action, and it makes people uncomfortable because you have to move forward into action where there is an unknown, typically, more often than not. And you're moving into that unknown where it requires a new level of courage in you. And high performance in any profession is directly tied to courage, and productivity is directly tied to courage. That's why productive procrastination and doing all those actions in your zone of competence, they're just spinning the wheels of busyness. And most people confuse being busy with being purposeful and intentional and courageous, because you can move the needle 10x by just doing a few actions of courage rather than doing all of these nice little busy work things that make you feel like you're working a lot, because that's typically praised, versus just being really intentional with a few specific actions that really move the needle with courage. And that's where the decision-making process has to come in, as far as like what conversations with your team are you avoiding? What job are you avoiding hiring for because you're like, that learning curve is going to be such a pain in the butt. I was working with one doctor who was really struggling with her practice because she needed to hire an office manager, but she didn't want to go through the learning curve. So she was still doing all the office management, which was keeping her stuck in this zone of competence that wasn't actually allowing her to be in her zone of genius, and it was capping her income.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and you know what? Everybody that we're talking to knows how to work with that with their clients. Is doing it themselves that's difficult.
Always. It's so you got to practice what you preach. I mean, even I had to have like my look in the mirror in Q4 of last year and say, oh, the model that I'm operating in is in my zone of excellence. I'm not actually being in my zone of genius. We need to change the business model entirely so that I can operate in my zone of genius, which then allows my team to operate in their zone of geniuses as well.
And that was a big decision, wasn't it?
It was big, and it was right off the success of my book. My gosh, I hit this like major high of like, yay, here's the book on how you do all the things podcasting. And then I'm like, I got to change the entire business model. So, but I was so happy that I did, because I knew I was going into maternity. And as soon as I shifted the business model, Cathy, like that's what's amazing. As soon as you make the decision, you will get the data and the feedback, the real-time feedback, as if that was the best decision for you. And as soon as I made that decision, we started booking consult client after consult client with no struggles with lead generation whatsoever. And I was like, okay, we're on the right path. We're doing the right things now because we're in alignment. And that's the thing is, it's not achievement that's the problem, especially for high achievers and doctors and coaches who have big goals and who are used to working with people to help them get to their goals. It's alignment and making sure those goals are in alignment, not just for your own egoic, desires of revenue and things like that, but also in alignment with where you are in your stage of life. Like, where are you with your fulfillment, and where are you with your happiness? Because ultimately we aren't building businesses to just be a consistent drain on our energy. That's not truly being of service. We have to make sure our cup is fulfilled and we're doing fulfilling, meaningful work that allows us to live a fulfilling, meaningful life and have fulfilling and meaningful relationships.
You've said never put your goals or your identity on a pedestal. What does
Yeah.
that mean?
So a lot of times, once you get past comparing yourself to other people, and I don't know if you ever completely get past it, but once you recognize, oh, I'm just comparing myself to someone who's farther ahead in the marathon than me, I just need to keep running. I'll get to the same mile marker as well eventually. But the hard part is when you compare yourself to your past identities of who you have been. So for example, as a marathon runner, when I'd run five marathons before giving birth to my first son. And I put myself and my health in this illusion of what I was holding on to and on a pedestal. And I said, oh, I've been a marathon runner. That's really fine. So when I signed up for my marathon post-maternity, a year after I'd given birth to my son, I was prideful in going into my training. And I let my ego, and that's what happens when we put anyone, whether it's someone else or our own past identities, up on a pedestal. A pedestal is a shaky surface. It can topple very easily. And we put it up there typically because of pride. And so because of my own pride, that marathon that I ran, I did not train hard enough, well enough. I did not condition my body in the same way because I thought, oh, I'd run it before. This was my past identity, but my body had changed through maternity. And I didn't honor where I was at being a beginner again. And I took myself at that marker, which was not really reality. And we have to be aware of where we're starting. And it's especially for the hard part is being a business owner when you recognize I'm a really good coach, but I'm a new business owner. Like I can do really, like when you have that humbling experience where you can be really good at one thing, but there are other things that you're a beginner at, and that's okay. And it's by taking yourself off the pedestal and taking past identities off the pedestal, you allow yourself to actually start in an actual finish, at an actual starting line, versus when you're on a pedestal, you're just an observer. You're not actually in the arena. You're not actually running the race. And so the only place to start and move forward is from being at the starting line and then moving forward and recognizing where are you a beginner.
Yep. When I ran, and I didn't run until I was 50, but I ran with pregnant women. I can remember there being on the marathon, there were pregnant women running, and they were outpacing me. It was
That's crazy. Oh, that's amazing. I never ran while pregnant just because I didn't want the harshness on my ligaments. I always did closed chain exercises, but I love the training after, and I'm excited to get back in marathon shape. I just started training for a half marathon. So I'm not even running yet though. And I'm honoring where my body is at. I'm at the point where I'm just walking and realigning my pelvis.
Yeah, I do the pool now, so you're still.
I love the pool too. I'm like, there's pop, who knows? Maybe there's an Ironman in my future. Like I said, I love a good challenge.
Okay, so how can we change our language to change our perception of how we experience life? We just did a program about this. It was called Think, Change Your Thoughts and Change Your Life. And you can do that, can't you?
Yeah, you can do that with a simple shift of language. For example, so to understand how language works, it's understanding the subconscious mind. And your subconscious mind is constantly listening, and it's basically a toddler, because your subconscious mind develops up until the age of the imprint period, which is about around 7 or 8. And so that forms about 95% of your programming, is estimated. So the hard part is when our subconscious mind, which is basically a 7-year-old, starts running our businesses. And so we have language patterns, we have things that we bump up against as we're growing our practices and our businesses that start to come up. So for example, if you're talking to a toddler, the subconscious mind does not understand negatives. And so many people are very good at sharing what they don't want. I don't want another low cash flow month. I don't want to make less than X. However, the subconscious mind is the seeker. And so what you say, it will seek after. And if it doesn't process completely negatives, it will process negatives, but it doesn't process them immediately. It'll have another step in the process, say, oh, I'm not supposed to think that, so I'm going to do this, but it gets confused. Mm-hmm. So just like if you ever told a 3-year-old, and I have one, so I'm like, don't throw the ball in the house. And every time I say that, I'm like, oh my gosh, I know what's going to happen next. The ball's being thrown across the hallway toward the glass chandelier. And I'm like, no. So being able to say, okay, that's a stop. So my husband and I changed our language. Instead of saying, don't do that, we say that's a stop, because you want to say it the way you want it. And I can't tell you how many leaders I have worked with where I've said, just make the list of what you want. Make the list of what you want in your dream client. Make the list of what you want in your dream partner. Make the list of what you want in your dream business. Make the list of how you want your relationship with money to feel. Like one of my clients, I was working with him, he had a wonderful training business, but his relationship with money was always, he would get a nice amount of revenue in, and then it would go out to bills immediately. And so there was very little cash flow in holding, and there was very little having. And I said, well, how would you like your relationship with money to feel? And he's like, well, not like this. Like, this feels terrible. And I said, okay, well, describe to me what that feels like. And he said, it feels like I can't trust it. It feels like it doesn't trust me. And I said, okay, well, let's build a relationship of trust with money then, and trusting that you can have money and that it can nourish you and that it can sustain you. And so just by putting a little bit, we started implementing Mike Malkowitz's Profit First, which was a key book. That's what took my profits to over 300% in 2020. And again, we grew it 150% in 2021 because of this process. Thank you so much, Mike. Highly recommend getting the book. So I recommended the book to him. He started implementing Profit First, and he was like, oh my gosh, I actually, like, I have money in an account. Like, it was foreign to him. Like, he was so used to having cash flow in, and like money come in and money goes out to OpEx and bills. And he started to build that trust within himself of, oh my gosh, I actually can have and sustain money. And so then we started to rewire his language with his relationship, where instead of the language was like, oh my gosh, I have to pay another bill. And just listen to that language. I have to pay another bill. Well, technically, who's forcing you? Like, there are consequences. And when I first started out my coaching business, I was doing a lot of health, like wellness and coaching around language, leveraging NLP, because that was just my background. And I taught a class at a college, and with NLP and language. And I said, who thinks Cheerios are good? And some people raise their hand and some people raise their, like, we're like, no. And I said, good how? Like, good as in morality? Like, are they morally good? And they're like, oh no. And it's like, good and bad is a moral concept, but good as in good for you. I mean, that's debatable. Good as in like they taste good to you. Yeah, maybe for some people, not for others. But we want to be aware of like what our language is and saying. And so when we ascribe labels of morality, like money is good or money is bad, or I'm so good in my profession, but I suck with money. Like these things that we're saying to ourselves, they shape our conscious belief systems and how we're experiencing our reality. And so I gave the other example with the words have to, of like, who had to make you come to this class today? And that the kids were like, well, my mom. Like, I have to go to college so I can stay living at my parents' house. And I was like, really? I said, you have to? Like, did she, like, was there a gun pointed at your head? And he was like, no. And I said, and even if there was, you still have a choice. You may not like the consequences of the alternative. And that's why one of my favorite quotes that I use and that I shared in my TED talk is from Viktor Frankl. And between stimulus and response, you have a choice. And that in right in there in those moments is your power, and it's your power to choose. And have to puts you at the effect. Any language where like, I have to pay this bill, I have to hire this person, I have to have this conversation with my team member, I have to sign a new client. It puts you at the effect of whatever it is that you're trying to do or whatever it is that you're trying to create. And if you want to be in the driver's seat of your life and of your business, then you need to put yourself in the creator seat. And so instead of being at the have to, you say, I choose to. And just saying it, just shifting your language from I have to do this to I am choosing to do this, or I get to do this. Like, I get to deal with a customer challenge. Like, just the other day I was talking to my husband and he caught me and I was like, oh, I catch myself on this too. I had a challenge with PayPal and just getting funds released from a client payment. And my husband was like, you get to, Kim, like, you used to dream of this problem.
You would have
Like,
loved to have had that problem, huh?
yes, it's like 8 years ago when you were starting your coaching business and you needed that, like, oh my gosh, you get to have this problem. Like, you would have just loved to have this problem 8 years ago. And so often when we realize, oh my gosh, how much we've already created, and we can look back and see the problems that we're having now were literally the things that we dreamed of years ago. I look at that with my kids too, and I'm like, oh, they're hitting each other, or oh, they're screaming at each other again. And I'm like, but I get to deal with this, and I get to be the mom, and I get to be in this beautiful role and role model the way, and try to keeping their hands to themselves. But I get to be in this space, and I dreamed of this problem when I dreamed of having kids.
Right.
And so every dream that you have, it's not like you're going to still live life. Like, there's going to still be problems. However, you're going to be more equipped to solve them with every learning lesson that you go through. And when you leverage your language to say, I choose to solve this problem because I'm choosing to lean into this dream. I get to solve this problem because I get to live a bigger life. That changes everything for your perceptions.
Right, exactly. We have now gone over on time, but it was fun.
I had fun with you, Cathy.
Thank you for being here today. I appreciate it. And I know we all learned a lot.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been a pleasure connecting with you and with your audience.